The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to another show. This is under the new numbering, as I mentioned before, episode number 78, which means we're chugging along. When I decided to streamline these episodes, go through all the work of changing the website and doing the feed, getting it all sorted, getting it in the proper places. It's part of the work was, doing some little intros for the older episodes to explain how you can ignore some of the other things. But anyway, long story short, I realized when doing all that, of course, that it puts my numbering way down from what it used to be because I lost a big chunk of those early episodes that didn't have anything to do with interviews. And now, as such, we get to have another episode 100. So now there's one in the 50s, I think. That's the one of me that was our former episode 100. But now we get to do another one. So now I get to have some time to figure out exactly what that's going to be. I don't know. I mean, this has been doing the show for 4 years now and 5 seasons, and it's been blessed. So I'd like to honor that with some fun stuff. I don't know exactly how to do that yet or what we're going to do, but I think we can come up with something fun. We got some time. Certainly do. Got some time. I am finally catching up on Loki, which, now that I'm working for myself, I have more time to catch up on shows. And it's amazing. It's a super good show. I mean, I love the first season, but the second one is great so far, and I'm not that deep in. But yeah, it's a blast. So I can really see why people have such love for that show and where it's going. But yeah, you think about these how Marvel has done these shows that are so wildly different when it comes to tone and theme and the characters, and Loki just feels like such an outlier, but it's so good. And very well done. So glad I'm finally getting a chance to watch that. Echo and Secret Invasion are on there too. I've been told that not to bother about Secret Invasion, but Marvel to me is kind of like the Marvel films anyway, and series is kind of like Star Wars. I like Star Wars a lot. I think Troy Little told me one time we were hanging out, I just like Star Wars. You can pick it apart, hate it, judge every little aspect of every little thing that doesn't give you what you want out of it, but I just like watching it. It makes me happy. So the Marvel movies and series are kind of like that. I mean, some are better than others for sure, but just watching it makes me happy, so I'm going to continue to do so. Even if it is Secret Invasion, I'm sure I'll find something redeeming about it. I always find that there's no wasted experiences when it comes to movies and TV. It'll make you feel something. And in the end, that's worthwhile. So let's, I'm going to explore that and have fun with it. But for now, really digging Loki, and excited to see where that's going to go. And, tune into the Marvel stuff as it comes. Unfortunately, Madam Web, I think, is another Craven, or one of them's the next one, so we'll see what that is. But anyway, the regular MCU stuff I'm excited about. It's looking pretty great, so very pumped for that. Anyway, today on the episode, we're talking with Fred Van Lente, someone who is a former writer for Marvel Comics, worked on Marvel Zombies, Incredible Hercules, that replaced Hulk for a little while, worked on Spider-Man, and a cool guy. Very, very candid conversation. He was very freeing with information about his career. We go in a few divergences, as we often do when we chat on this show, which is, to me, is kind of like when the conversations get good, because when you can kind of let the conversation flow and go off and talk about other subjects, come back, but keep the story going, that's when you're in a good flow, and I felt like I had a good one with Fred. Great conversation. So, yeah. I mean, the guests on the show have been doing quite well as far as upscaling the level of people's involvement in the mainstream. But I'm not just about that. It is great to have people that have been involved in the comics world be in the show and let us know their side of the story and also the ins and outs of their careers. But I'm also happy to talk to the smaller press people or other unsung heroes of the business. So I'm excited to explore that as much as possible. But with this weekly format, we got a lot of episodes coming. firing through the pipeline, and we've got a bunch more. So big thanks to Davin, producer Davin, for doing that. And yeah, you for tuning in. So let's keep it rolling. Anyway, without much further ado, let's get to my conversation with Fred Van Lente. Hey, Fred.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Oh man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Happy to be here.
It's funny. I was doing a little bit of research, and I have to say, I said it's a real honor to meet the man who created what possibly may be the most disturbing scene in any comic I've ever read.
Ooh, tell me more.
I don't know why. Specifically, I've been a Spider-Man fan my whole life,
Okay.
but for some reason, that Marvel Zombies panel where the Sandman goes into him and makes him explode.
Yes.
And I don't know why, but that has always sat with me in my head as being one of the most disturbing scenes. I don't know if it's just because the use of the power is done in such a horrifying way, the cartooniness of the art, the fact he yells Gwen before he explodes, or that he explodes in such a sort of unceremonious way in which he's sort of lying there with like all of his guts out. I don't know why, but for some reason that has always stuck with me.
Yeah, Nick Dragata really crushed it on that book. I get a lot, but actually what I get more than that moment is the his veins shooting out of his wrists instead of webs.
Right. Yeah.
That I get people getting more squeamish about. But yeah, I've also gotten the Sandman one before. Yeah, that was a fun book to do, just because I'm such a huge Spider-Man nut
Yeah.
and killing off his cast and such.
There must be something really. I mean, I want to get through obviously your whole career and everything. It's just for some reson that really that and I don't know because I'm a big horror guy. I watch like the gory stuff doesn't bother me for some.
Right.
And it wasn't the gore of it. I don't know if it's just that the character like seeing him go out that way
Right.
or how exactly it was. But for some reason, it always just stuck in there. And I wanted to double check. So I'm pretty sure it was your book. So I was re-looking through them and I was like, yeah, there it is. So
Yeah, it's always fun to take some of these superpowers to like their, obvious real world extremes. That's why The Boys is so much fun, because that show has no sentimentality about showing every aspect of,
oh yeah.
bodily harm that can be done to us regular humans by superpowers.
And even like if you've read the comic, which I'm sure most people have that are ever listened to a show like this, I honestly believe that if there was real world superpowers and this was the nature of how they were, that they probably wouldn't be too far off about the way some of these people would be behaving. I mean, Garth Ennis always takes it to the ultimate degree, but the idea that like they're basically celebrities and they're going to use that power to do whatever they want and get away with it, or just be all the hedonistic lifestyle that they secretly want. I don't feel like it's that far off. They basically just become what we know as celebrities now. And,
Yeah, I mean, what I loved,
Mhm.
boy, it has a lot of the same themes as the old martial law series.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Or Pat Mills and the late great Kevin O'Neill. I always love that. That's almost a better treatment of the Boys premise than the Boys.
Yeah. I always said the same thing. It was a real precursor to that series for sure.
Yeah.
And certainly one that's not as celebrated as it should be for how good it was.
Indeed.
Yeah, awesome. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in northeastern Ohio in a small town called Chagrin Falls, not a made-up name, actual place.
That's a pretty great name if it wasn't made up.
South of Cleveland, but not that far south. Chagrin Falls is I'm only the second or perhaps third most famous comics person to come out of Chagrin Falls, since that's where Bill Watterson, Hobbs fame, grew up, and depicts the town in a lot of the comics. Sorry.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Who's the second one?
Well, I think it depends on how broadly you define comics. I think the guy who directed Coco, the Pixar movie, went to my high school.
Oh,
I don't know why I think this. I think I read that randomly somewhere, but
hey,
yeah,
that's quite a claim to fame. I'm from Nova Scotia. I live in Canada, so I don't have as many. I mean, there are quite a few people that work in the comics industry that live here now, but
Right.
many of them are from Toronto or other places and came out here during COVID or some other place because
Okay.
once it became apparent that you didn't need to spend as much money living in a massive city like Toronto and getting out to places like where I live. Like Ed Burston's out here and Jed McKay and a few other people that work for Marvel. So
The closest, this isn't that close, but the closest I've been is Moncton, and there are a lot of comics folks in Brunswick.
Oh yeah, Nick Bradshaw and quite a few folks out there.
I went to acclaim. I went to a lobster bake at Nick Bradshaw's house.
Well, I might have
lobster boil, I should say.
I don't know if I was there for that one. He's a friend, and I usually go to the East Coast Comic Expo to sell art and stuff. I do different things like that. And
in that hockey rink.
Yeah, at the that's the one. It was very cool. Yeah.
No, I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, that's the beauty of that event too, because like there were a lot around. Like there's a place one called HowCon in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and they're almost more like comics are like a side note to like sci-fi and the bigger things. But Nick's one is real love for the comics medium itself, and which is very refreshing and very cool to be a part of.
People love my East Coast comic. I like it also because it has a very grandiose name.
Yeah,
the East Coast Comics Con. People like it. I still have my T-shirt.
Oh, excellent. Well, it gives you some. It's almost like listening to an album that that not a lot of people know of. It gives you that sort of indie cred.
Where is that? Moncton. What? That's not a place. That word up.
Just like Chagrin Falls, you're just making up names.
Right?
So were comics always a part of your youth?
One is slightly larger than the other. Yes, very much so. In fact, I learned to read through comics. My mother got sick of reading Jules Pfeiffer's book, The Great Comic Book Heroes, to me over and over again. So I just sat there and stared at the words and pictures until I could figure them out. Yeah, no, I've always been a comics nut. When I was a kid, a superhero nut, reading like the Marvel reprints of pocketbooks and playing with my Mego figures and all that stuff. And then Star Wars came along.
Blew your little mind.
Yeah, very much so. and then got caught up in the work of the great sort of British invasion. The work of the Alan Moore and Grant Morrison were huge influences.
Yeah,
and I went to college at Syracuse and just met a bunch of people who were illustration majors, and we all moved to New York City to break up the comic industry.
So, like, well, what age did you figure you wanted to write comics? Like, is it always something that was in your head, or?
I dabbled with it. I went to school technically to be a film major, and I discovered to my shock I didn't like making movies very much.
What aspect of filmmaking? Like straight into directing, or were you?
Well, for the first couple of years, they give you a lot of theater training, and then when you're a sophomore, you start making movies, and that's when I learned. Like, and this is also the early '90s. Like, I might have stuck with it more, because I as a kid I was all thumbs technically, so like I just couldn't. I severely disliked dealing with lights, fucking with the film and the magazines, and with tape and razor blades on a flatbed just seemed bonkers.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of extra work and unnecessary work. I think that if, I'd gone to school a decade later, they were just adding, like, while I was there, the school added like digital editing text and editing days. And I think if I had access to that technology, I might not have dropped out so quickly. But part of the reason I dropped out was because of my friendship with the comics guys, and I just really liked how writing for them kind of brought my ideas to life in a really kind of interesting way, and there wasn't like the waiting around. Anyone who movies can tell you that the huge component of making movies is just
Oh yes, I do some acting and
around the set.
I do some acting. I'm in the union in Canada's union, and I've done a few things here and there, but mostly a lot of background lately. And there's a show called From. It's a horror show they film here. It's on like Paramount or something. And you're like most days you're sitting there for 14 hours. I just do work on my tablet, sit there and draw or something, and and then you might use you for 5 minutes. You sit on a couch somewhere and look off into the distance, and then they seal you back in and send you home. But it's an interesting point about like how I think certain I mean, certain things seem to hit you in the right place. And when technology catches up in a way that maybe it makes more sense that it's more accessible. Like I used to do my own little indie comics and stuff. And then I sort of fell out of it just because of life and getting busy and time. But now with like drawing tablets and being able to do it almost completely on, now with like drawing tablets, which I got, and the styluses and like now all these steps are removed, it makes it so much faster and so much easier that like it's really sparked the love of doing it again. So
Right.
yeah, the old days of film, like I'm a big movie guy, so the old days of filmmaking with like the canisters and the cigarette burns, so like there's a part of you where that romanticized that, but also the idea that like I don't know, filming like Lawrence of Arabia, they'd have to cart around like a truckload full of just of
Yeah.
reels to to record the 4 hour
Well,
movie.
and film is expensive. Developing film is
Oh
expensive. If you
yes,
color film, it's expensive. So, and I was lucky I came from, a kind of well-off family. So that wasn't an issue for me. It was certainly an issue for lots of other people in the
yeah,
same.
awesome. But comics kind of like I mean, I always kind of equate comics to movie making, like almost in a more boiled down version of it, in a sense that you're just a lot of steps are removed from the writing to the image of it, like to see it in practice. So it's kind of like the collaborative nature of filmmaking. You found a simplified version of it by going to and an easier version by going to comics.
To a certain degree, I mean, they're very different media, as I constantly have to like remind people whose primary background is movies.
Yeah.
uh, Quite a lot. One of the things people from movies love is they just put some background stuff in there, like have a character's doing such and such in the background. I'm like, that's not how comics work.
No, you really don't need that.
Unless you're Jack Davis, you can't just add a shit ton of random crap in the background and expect anyone to pay any attention to it.
Yeah. There's a reason why the backgrounds are incredibly simplified often in comics, where like you look at, a dude that's on a park bench in the back and he's just a basic form because, it's not that important. But cool. So what was the like with so you said you went to Syracuse and then you got tied up with the comics community and got into that world and followed them on.
Right.
Was that just you were starting to write then? Like what were you working on?
Yeah. I did a science fiction comic with my friend Steve Ellis that we came up with in college called Tranquility. And that became one of the first things that came out from like a nobody publisher in 97, and no one read it. Banned quickly. The 12 issue epic became 4 issues. It was picked up by it got optioned for movies, and so that's how I got involved with this outfit, Platinum Studios. And for them I wrote my first kind of quote unquote professional gig, which was a graphic novel called Cowboys and Aliens. And after a very long process, that became a movie in 2011. But,
How did you feel?
Hmm?
I was gonna say, how did you feel about the way that movie had come about?
It's a weird situation because we are talking about a decade went by
Hmm.
between me turning in the script and the movie coming out, and it took at least 5 years for the comic to come out. And the
So was the comic out like because I was curious about that one because I remember like when the movie had come out, the comic all of a sudden was everywhere. And it was all like based on a comic, but I don't remember seeing it out there. Was it just something that was out there, or was it something that was designed by the studios to kind of come out together?
No, it came out prior. There was a bit of a scandal because they somehow gamed, I think, the Entertainment Weekly had a comics. If I remember correctly, it was Entertainment Weekly had some kind of comics bestseller list.
Hmm.
And so what Platinum was and is run by this guy, Scott Rosenberg, who I think he started out as a retailer. I may be wrong about that, but he had a black and white company called Eternity during the black and white bust era of the late 80s. And so he sort of rose to prominence and made a lot of money because he was the original distributor of the Image books, of the
Oh, okay.
wave of Image books like Spawn and Wildcats and that stuff. And those all sold millions of copies. And so from that, he did a company called Malibu, which by a weird coincidence is the first comic that I did. The first work for hire comic I did that came out was Prime. Those of you Malibu fans may remember Prime.
Oh, I remember.
Kind of a Shazam. I don't know if he's a ripoff or he was like a science fiction Shazam
Mhm.
Kid, becomes adult superhero when he, you know,
By possibly the most muscly superhero ever created, I
Norm,
think.
Norm Brayfogle, yes.
Yeah.
And so I did one of the last issues of Prime after it was bought by Marvel. And Marvel and by extension Disney owns those characters. And from what I understand, you will never see them again. They've been
Is
sealed.
is there a reason, like, does Marvel just not care for them because they didn't create them, or is it just that they don't see what to do with them, or they just think there's no because like they had their time. Like I remember when Malibu was kind of like the new cool thing because everyone was there's all these new universe and all this cool
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah, for a while there, it was like Valiant slash
Hmm.
Malibu. Like they both kind of, I think, premiered very close to each other. No, in sort of an I must say uncharacteristic burst of generosity, uh, the people who ran Malibu gave the creators, the writers specifically, people like Steve Gerber and Steve Englehart,
Mhm.
I think Bruce Jones, or is it Gerard Jones? I don't remember. Anyway, they gave them very generous kind of like it was work for hire, but they had generous back ends.
Mhm.
And I don't think the lawyers want to deal with that. So
Ah,
so bringing back those characters would trigger various contractual obligations to the creators of those characters, which Disney corporate doesn't want to deal with.
fair
And
enough.
since they own Marvel anyway, what's the big deal? People forget that Disney, before they bought Marvel, also owned CrossGen.
Yes.
So there was a period there where Disney was playing footsie with a bunch of the comic characters. Those characters you've seen since, but
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. That's kind of a gap in my comics history. I was
Yeah,
just
that's when like Disney properties were coming out under that title, which was weird for a while.
well, I'm actually talking about the original CrossGen.
Yeah.
I went over my head completely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I recall those as well. A friend of mine who works for Marvel now, I believe, did some art on some of those early on.
Yep,
Uh,
like Perkins, a bunch of guys, and a bunch of guys stayed in Florida. I remember the artist Mike Perkins. He's gone back to England, but he was
no.
in Florida for a long time because he moved there for CrossGen. And Ron Mars worked
Mhm.
for
Oh,
Cross.
yes. Yeah. So, what was the controversy about the getting on? Was it getting the Cowboys and Aliens book on the
Oh,
Entertainment
sorry.
Weekly? Yeah, sorry.
So essentially, Platinum kind of gamed the system and basically flooded stores with this kind of Dark Knight return style 48 page like perfect bound book, which was my book technically, even though they were on the dialogue because they thought it was too amusing or whatever.
Yeah.
The big barrier to getting Cowboys and Aliens made was the movie Wild Wild West,
Okay.
because that bombed, and so people all assumed, and
But like
with
20 years ago, right? Like before, like maybe not 20, but 15.
not
Like it was a while ago.
97, 98, but yeah, I mean, a significant amount of time,
Yeah.
but like 12, 13 years between the two movies,
Yeah.
but like, so everyone would kind of like, we don't want, genre westerns because it's going to be like, Wild Wild West, which is ironic because Platinum's first property was, the reason Platinum exists in the first place is Malibu published a comic called Men in Black,
Mhm.
which I've never seen the comic, but my understanding is it's nothing. It's, the movie's far superior. And so guys like Scott realized, oh, I can sell stuff to Hollywood and I don't even need necessarily a solid comic. I can just do
Yeah.
whatever. And so I wrote a bunch of stuff for them in 2001. I got along really well with my editor, Lee Nordley, and I was broke, and they threw me some bucks to write some of these comics. And they published they published about half of them, I'd say.
Hmm.
But the only one that kind of went anywhere was Cowboys and Aliens. And that
So
movie didn't do well either. So
yeah. Well, how I mean the process of being a writer and having your work sort of translated into film has got to be an interesting one because at some point it's not yours anymore. Like once I assume the script is there, it's gone.
Sometimes the comic isn't even yours.
That is that's fair too. Yeah. But like when you see a finished thing, like I recently talked with Fabrice Sapolsky, and he was talking about even like Spider-Man Noir that he co-created.
Pretty
And
well.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, he was very cool. A great conversation. And also you mentioned Men in Black. I've had the artist on that series, the comic series, on. His name's Sandy Crothers. He lives in PEI. But yeah, so and we had a chat about that too, because he like went to the premiere. Like he got invited. Like he didn't have a back end deal or anything. He was just a pay for hire comic guy. The guy, the writer, was the one who made money on that one. But he got invited to the premiere and got to sit there and see the whole thing. So, but
I'm
the idea.
invited to Cowboys and Aliens premiere, but I was not also given a ticket to Los Angeles.
Oh,
My hotel room. I was like,
yeah, I don't blame you. But like, I guess the blow, I wouldn't say blowback. Like I know the movie came and went, but like as far as that experience goes and the public reaction to it, like how did you reconcile with that?
I got a lot of great convention invites out of
Mm-hmm.
it. Like I got to go to Guatemala, and
Oh, cool.
I believe that's why I got invited to. I got to go to Toronto. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, and a couple other places that just from and Houston, I think, just because of the movie connection.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't actually watch the movie until years after it came out, just because I was pretty annoyed with how the comic was treated. And then I saw the movie. It's like, it's funny because in 2000, when they first approached me the job, they wanted to do like a serious, like they wanted to be cowboys and aliens, as in like, H.R. Geiger's,
Yeah.
I'm like, this does not seem like a fair fight. Like, I mean, they gave me what they'd worked on, but it was much more of a Men in Black kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of like did that, but then I saw the movie and I'm like, okay, you're taking this premise way too seriously.
Yeah.
And so I tried to dump on the movie too much because I always meet people who are like, that's my favorite movie. And I'm like,
Oh, really? Oh, I'm interested to see those people.
like,
Yeah, it's funny that they.
but I will not contradict you in any way.
Yeah, the older I get, the more I'm like, what? If don't yuck someone's yum, if they like something, whatever. Power to you. You're not hurting anyone, and it makes you happy. I'm happy. So yeah, what's funny is I always said that about like the Predator franchise. I'm like, it seems like they have a perfect setup already where they could just dump the Predator into cowboy times, dump him into medieval night times, dump him into feudal Japan.
That great movie Prey.
Yeah, which they're doing now, which sounds great. I'm happy they're finally doing that.
Yeah.
It's like we don't need to reinvent everything. Sometimes the concept is strong enough. If you just dump it and change the environment, you can have a great story, or at least explore some different stuff. So it's funny that they wanted to do. I love the aliens and aliens in cowboy times would be like the H.R. Geiger aliens would be a very interesting experiment. But
to a certain extent, I'm up against this, and as much as I enjoy Prey, it's I'm a person with a technological disadvantage against a far superior, remorseless enemy. That story, we've seen that story a lot.
That's true.
And Prey is a very good example of it. But I'm glad I didn't do that for Cowboys and Aliens. And really, the Cowboys and Aliens movie was more incoherent of what they actually wanted it to be.
Yeah. Well, I don't fault anyone for anything involved with movies that don't turn out well, because there are so many moving parts and so many people that have something to do with it that like no one person can usually be to blame for any failure of a movie or for any reason, whatever you decide a failure of a movie is. But, I mean, because it's subjective too. Like you mentioned, so many people love it. Great. But it's just, for whatever reason, it didn't work the way that studios or whoever wanted to. Like there's so many people.
Steven Spielberg involved, and
yeah,
Favreau and Daniel Craig and Harrison Ford and everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
On
so
paper, it sounds great.
Yeah. So moving on from that, I guess, what was the next thing in the career?
So then I did the Cowboys and Alien thing, and so I just wasn't getting any traction. So basically it took me about 9 years before I finally did something for Marvel. So I was at Marvel for Steve Ellis, the aforementioned Steve Ellis, and I, another Syracuse grad. We did a comic called The Silencers, which was this sort of Sopranos meets superpowers book about a bunch of superpower mob enforcers who have to go independent when the mob family they work for gets wiped out. So that book came out and was, again, nobody read it, but unlike Tranquility, we got really great reviews, and like Wizard, promoted and stuff. So that got me a gig at Marvel, and so I was at Marvel from like, and I was lucky because I was temping for the UN, and I'd broken my ankle. So I, that was another sort of dark
You
day.
were temping for the UN? This is a side gig where
Yeah,
you were trying to get writing work? Wow, what was
yeah,
that
yeah. Well,
like?
I was an office temp in New York City, Manhattan mostly, and then I was working for the United Nations, yeah, as a temp, but a pretty well paid temp, and working their pension fund. The United
Yeah.
Nations pension fund is one of the biggest. I think it is the biggest in the world, and one of the most complex because part of the reason everyone wants to work for the UN is because you must be paid in your country's currency equivalent to its current value against the American dollar. So it's very, very, very lucrative. And I think you retire at like 50 also, which is another. So
Wow.
I
What was
had
that? What was that experience like?
it was fun.
Yeah.
It was I mean, it was fun. And then I missed a lot of last year because I broke my ankle. Um Essentially down some stairs. There was more to it than that, but that's the long and the
I
short.
assumed it was some kind of
Uh,
black ops thing where you were, taking a bullet
no,
for
you're
someone.
right.
Or...
Yeah, no,
we can tell that story.
I killed all the other ninjas, but one of them
Yeah.
got
Oh, well, fair. If you only walked away with a broken ankle, you did well.
exactly. Well, any fight you want. Well, if you have a broken ankle, you're crawling away from that
Yeah.
fight, unless you happen to have crutches nearby.
Yeah.
One's walking away from that fight with a broken ankle. That's not ankle. That's not how ankles work.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so they hired me to do this crazy uh they reinvented the scorpion. I won't even. I told the story
Oh,
too long.
I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I did a scorpion strip for the Amazing Fantasy book, which everyone hated because there was no,
Is that character still kicking around the Marvel U?
What's that?
Is that character still kicking around the Marvel U somewhere?
To my knowledge, she showed up in animated form in the Marvel Modoc,
Oh, okay.
which I am biased. A bunch of my characters in that series are in it, and Patton Oswalt is a nice dude and adapted this book I did, Modoc's 11, for one of the episodes. But I think it's terrific, and it's very fun.
Oh, I've watched it. Yeah, it's great.
It's great.
Yeah.
And folks should check it out. But yeah, but that was sort of my inaugural entry to Marvel, and they kept trying to get rid of me, but stuck around.
Really?
Well, the way it sort of works at Marvel is all of the editors have their own little turfs, and their turfs with a U, by the way.
I'm glad you made that distinction.
They have their own little turf wars, and they bring in their people, and like it was weird because I had this. A lot of people come from Image, right? Like they do an Image book that hits big, and they're like, come work for Marvel. So Image is like the farm team, right? But I had done an indie book nobody had ever heard of before. I'd just gotten a lot of glowing like write-ups in like Wizard magazine and stuff. So, and my first thing was this weird mutant, not in the X-Men sense, but like misbegotten attempt to bring in the kids. So then I got stuck in the kids line, which I actually really enjoyed, doing the World Adventures line for like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and I did every issue of the Iron Man book. I did the Wolverine kids book, which is amusing.
It must be an interesting exercise in creativity to take
a lot of robots. Just put it that way.
Makes it easier to slice things up, right?
It's like a lot of robots.
Yeah, it's like the old Ninja Turtles cartoon where every time they'd hit like a foot soldier, he just explode because he's a robot. Like it's way easier than using knives and swords on real humans. Like just throw some robots in there.
Exactly. And then the big break that in my career came in 07, 08 when we launched the Incredible Hercules book, when Hercules took over the Incredible Hulk book, and that book was very, very well received and popular. And that's how I got the Marvel. So then I ended up getting so then there's an old cliche that you should never be good at a job you hate. And I loved doing the obscure stuff. That as a kid, that's what I was really into. Like obscure titles like Alpha Flight.
Yes, what you worked on. As a Canadian, it's one that's always very close to my heart.
I have been on CBC3. This is
perfect. There,
I'm public broadcasting.
Excellent.
And so I liked that stuff, but I ended up, just being what I like to say about my time at Marvel is they kept giving me suicide missions, but I kept coming back.
It's like a cockroach. We can't kill him. We try. Yeah.
Uh, but
Well, I think I came to you mostly originally with some of your film work on Spider-Man. Like you were in the web series for a little while, right? Web Spider-Man?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's probably when
I did the Spider-Man series that I wasn't allowed to put Spider-Man in. When they were like, "Why isn't this selling well?" I'm like, "You tell me, yeah, it's a real mystery." This Fred Van Lente guy can't sell books. Weird assignment.
Yeah, let's build up this every obstacle we can in front of him, and then blame him when it doesn't work.
I don't know.
I can't wait to see James Bond 22, where James Bond isn't in it. We just follow Moneypenny and M for a while and see what they do.
So, but I was one of the 7 people writing Amazing Spider-Man, so that was fun. So I've got like a dozen-ish Amazing Spider-Man, whatever it is. It's probably a half a dozen Spider-Man issues. That's how I got Marvel Zombies. I got Marvel Zombies 3. I took over from Kirkman. Why did I get the job? Why, of course, when I found out when they gave it to me, the higher-ups fucking hated Marvel Zombies. This is right before the Disney sale. They hated Marvel Zombies because they were terrified that like little Timmy was gonna, little Timmy's mother was gonna write in angrily because little Timmy had a comic where Spider-Man ate.
I mean, how often does that happen? It's like
I mean, to my knowledge, never.
Yeah.
I was made aware of, and we already brought up the Spider-Man zombie comic. I did because Marvel Zombie. I did Marvel Zombie, so they wouldn't let me use any marquee characters. So I came with this idea of using Machine Man to go into the zombie world and do a mission there, and that was very successful. Still, my highest selling comic was Marvel Zombies 3.
Well, that's interesting because like I was thinking about the obscurity of some of the characters using. So it was like the Son of Satan and like Howard the Duck, and I was like,
I got to do all of my. I love all those 70s Marvel monster characters, so I was able to do that. I was happier than pig and shit. And then they were like, "Let's do." Then they let us do. For some reason, they changed their minds, and we did Marvel Zombies Return, which was we got to do Spider-Man, and I brought in my buddy Dave Wellington, who's a well-known zombie novelist, and he did Iron Man, and we brought in a bunch of zombie characters. That was fun.
Yeah, well, that thing was such a cultural thing at a time. Like, I mean, so many offshoots of it. I'm a board game guy too. I just got the Marvel Zombies Zombie Side. I kickstarted it a couple years ago.
I have the Black Death one.
Oh yes, I have several versions of it. But they just redid that. You get the giant Galactus. Like I got everything. So and now they're doing a DC one for their DC line, which of course. But no, that was such a kind of a cultural thing, really. I mean, because Miller kind of brought them into that Ultimate FF story, and then it sort of ballooned beyond that. But it's funny that Marvel would care. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously they're big corporations; they have a lot of things to worry about. But you think when something's selling so well, like why wouldn't you just go all in on it? Like being afraid of a few angry parents. I mean, that's why they have the ratings on the comics, right? Sort of the point.
But they
know what we all know, that nobody pays attention to that.
Yeah, exactly. Enter any entertainment company has a bunch of middle managers who worry about nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And try to make things happen based on their nonsense because they are worried, not without justification, that someone will go, "What's your job? What are we paying you? What is your value additive to the company?" "Oh, I oversee things and I complain about so and so." "Oh, okay. Yes, quality control is my job."
Yeah, sure. Keep up the good work.
Yeah. most people. You go out in the workforce and you learn, regardless of what most people's job title or job description is, their real job is keeping their job.
Yeah.
And if sometimes that entails doing actual useful things, great. But a lot of times it just means covering your ass and,
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty standard.
Someone else is blamed for things when bad things happen, which may or may not have anything to do with you whatsoever.
Well, so we're working on, I guess, Alpha Flight, which I was a little curious about too, just because, like, I'm always curious when American creators are given like a Canadian property and said, "Hey, run with
Right.
this." Obviously, Canada is not fundamentally different from America. I wouldn't say that it's like all of a sudden you
Well,
have to do like, well, in ways, but in a way as far as like cities.
similar backgrounds.
Yeah, exactly. But like it's like, all of a sudden you're like, well, we're going to move the Just League to Australia. Here, do this.
Well,
That might be slightly different, because totally.
some books have suffered from not being in the hands of their original creators. Like I don't think anyone's actually ever done Doctor Strange better than Steve Ditko.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
Likewise, I think the appeal for Alpha Flight, speaking as it being my favorite comic when I was like 13,
Hmm.
was John Byrne's weird. You
Hmm.
know, there is kind of like a weird, dark Canadian sensibility that
Hmm.
is like. I don't know enough about Canada to psychoanalyze it, but like you see it also in like Cronenberg and people like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
William Gibson's not technically Canadian, but he's been in Canada like since he's like a long time, like I think since his early 20s. So you see a lot of that also.
That's
But
interesting. I'd like a good chunk of that may have came from there was a real issue like with Cronenberg specifically way back in the day. The Canadian government had a real incentive on horror films, like or on films in general for independent filmmakers, and Cronenberg took advantage of that, which is how he got money to make. And it was kind of controversial at the time because in the '70s they got movies like Shivers and Rabid, the early
right,
ones
well,
he made.
and all of his crews were all porn.
Yeah, yeah. Marilyn Chambers was in Rabid, right?
Well, no, I mean I'm talking about the behind the camera people. They were
Yeah.
all porn people because that was where the experience and skill set was in Canada at the time.
Yep.
Was people, that's what was people were making porn.
And that was a big controversy because people would like the taxpayers would complain that their money was going to making a movie like Rabbit or Shivers, which they saw no cultural or value in because they didn't like those sort of movies. I mean, film nuts like myself love Cronenberg and his sensibilities, but yeah, it's interesting. There's a weird little darkness to Canada that seems to get glossed over because I think, and the world sees this as being this really polite, kind sort of people, which is nice. But like anywhere, there is dark sides too. We don't have a pristine past either. So.
As a PSA from my fellow Americans, you may know Shivers better as They Came From Within. Which
Right, of course, yes. I always forget that had a different title in the States, but
Shivers is such a better title anyway.
yeah, and like strange, very cool movie. But even like his later stuff, like The Brood and all that, and even To the Fly, which is probably his most
Brood
famous
is probably
one.
my favorite.
It's a good like that Oliver Reed in that, and the guy I can't remember. He's a Canadian actor, but he's on like a bunch of shows in Canada growing up. But he was the husband in that. He was on the Pod Person movie from the '70s, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he, him and that, and Samantha Eggers. Oh man, that whole
part of the tax break is they could use. You may already know this. Part of the reason there's so many British people in those early movies is because you were allowed to use Commonwealth actors while retaining your tax break. You couldn't use Americans or any other nationality, but if British or Commonwealth, okay, 30% of your talent could be outside Canada, but only within the Commonwealth.
Yeah, well, and they went with like some pretty heavies. I mean, Reed was
Barbara Steele, baby.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I'll just very briefly tell my favorite David Cronenberg story, which he tells in his book Cronenberg and Cronenberg, where he was making Shivers, and a few of the actors on Shivers, as we brought up, were porn actors. The lead was a porn actress, wasn't untalented, but had a real tough time, doing real stuff. So.
She was in like The Green Door or something, which was a pretty big one at the time.
Right? I think that was Marilyn Chambers. I don't know if she was also in The Big Door, but Rabbit had Marilyn Chambers.
Rabbit, that's right. Sorry, I got to yeah.
I don't remember what this woman's name was. Anyway, so she would literally, the story as he tells it is that, if you know the plot, it's parasites take over this high rise in Montreal, causing chaos, and so she's crying a lot because a lot of upsetting things happen to her character. So he had her slap her around before it takes so she could get into the mood, and then Barbara Steele comes in from England to do her 3 days of shooting, and she's seeing this guy, this little tiny Jewish Canadian dude, slap his chick around, and she gets furious. And Barbara Steele is like 6 feet tall, like she's a posing sort of Valkyrie-esque woman, and she basically just picks up David Cronenberg and is like, "What the fuck are you doing? I've never seen anybody treat an actress like this before." And Cronenberg's like, I'm sorry. She made me do it. And she's like, "How hard are you hitting her?" how hard are you hitting her? And he hits her on her arm.
Yeah.
She goes, so he hits her and she goes, are there any scenes where I cry? So bringing it back real quick to Alpha Flight. So I think
Yeah.
Alpha Flight works best as just a weird neurotic people who happen to be superheroes
Mm-hmm.
who are constantly like self-sabotaging themselves. And it only worked for that 2-year run of Byrne stuff where it was a very high selling comic. And everyone I think who's tried to do it since so when Greg and I did it, my idea, because I of the two of us, I don't think Greg cares if I'll say this. I was the
Yeah.
Alpha Flight mega nut. And I put the characters in all the comics because I love them so much. And they'd been treated pretty shabbily since their original run.
Mm-hmm.
I think like a lot of minor characters being casually murdered for
Yeah, most famously by Bendis in his Avengers run. Just off panel, let's just wipe out the whole team, and then which they seem to like to do for a while. It's like, here's an old team we haven't done, like the New Warriors or something. Let's just wipe them all out.
My character, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a cheap way to don't get me started on Valiant killing off many of my characters for no reason. But yeah, so my idea was, look, I'm not Canadian. I've been to Canada a bunch of times, but I thought it was interesting. What if take the concept of a superhero team that represents or is a government-run superhero team, and what happens when the government turns on? So could have been Canada, it was Canada. It could have been Thailand. Could have been, India. It could have been, France. It didn't. The fact it was Canadian was that there had to be somewhere, and Marvel, and and then we got that was another stupid turf war where a lot of people say they like that series, and I really appreciate it. A lot of people say they don't like that series, but a lot of people like the series. I really appreciate it, but it just got editorially, it was not what I wanted to do. So it was a disappointment to me because we had to fight with the X office to because the X-Men office had claimed a bunch of those Alpha Flight characters, particularly the mutants, obviously. And so we only got some of them. We wanted to use Puck, but Puck was dead, and then Puck suddenly turned up alive for no reason. And it was just a mess. And we were doing it with Fear Itself, which was a very poorly received event.
Yeah. That was one of the first that I remember feeling like maybe these events are too much. And it's not like they've backed up on it. They've almost gone double down on it with like, just because if I'm reading like a Spider-Man comic and all of a sudden there's like 3 issues in the middle of a big storyline that has something to do with something else I know nothing about, all of a sudden, they're fighting Carnage now, and it's like, what? And then like, because it's part of Carnage Unleashed or some other big event that I'm not paying attention to, it's like, ugh.
And then to add insult to injury, they were like, we had North Star kissing his boyfriend in the first issue, and the editor-in-chief at the time was like, don't do that. But it was like the artist already drawn it, so like I'm leaking this to fucking be cool. Fortunately they relented and they let the panel go. It says, I'm like, it's 2012. What are we even fucking doing here?
Yeah, for sure.
And then to add insult or injury, that same editor-in-chief they made the North Star wedding issue, and they yanked it from Alpha Flight and gave it to another writer in another book while our book was still going on. It's like, fuck you guys. And the only reason they did it was because Canada's had gay marriage forever, and it become legal in New York State, so they had to make it. It was just like, whatever. Like, this book's not selling. Thanks, guys. Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Why? I guess you don't know sell books.
Oh man.
So I wouldn't have a career without Marvel. I got to do a lot of awesome things at Marvel, but it's as far as I know, it still is an unpleasant place to work because there's so much toxic political nonsense. And
well, it seems
political, office politics.
Yeah.
Up the road kind of place.
Well, the idea that like it's almost like, not to equate it to your country, but like a country like the United States, where it's like there's little, like almost every state is its own little country. So like you have, no wonder there's issues between everybody because you're all fighting over characters, and this guy wants to use that and this, and it just seems like the politics of it would be so broad and wild that like
it's very factional. It's run by a lunatic.
Well, even the
on veteran affairs, even though he's never served in the American military.
And it's
just like, a billionaire who's like suing the guy who built a tennis court with inside it. Like it's the guy's just out of his mind.
Yeah.
People Marvel fans got all freaked out when Disney bought them, like, oh, they're gonna water them down. Like, no, the company's so much better since Disney bought them. It's not even funny.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would assume so. But I feel that would add its own level of issue in because now you have the film division to worry about. And I've talked to enough people that work for Marvel currently or have in the past that like, how that changes editorial, how they want characters to look like they do in the movies or to ape some stuff. And and even just your characters getting used in these movies and getting nothing. Like I know Jim Starlin's like, I made more money doing background on the Avengers movie than I did from them using Thanos at the level they have in all these movies, right?
Sure.
Like,
oh yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah, I consider myself somewhat lucky in that I'm probably of the last generation of comics creators that have made more of an impact on the Marvel universe. Because I got started right. My first Marvel gig was really 2005, and Iron Man comes out in 2008, and I think I'm trying to remember when Disney bought them. Was it 2010? I don't remember. Soon thereafter, but from going forward, those things are, not that it was that different to begin with, but there's really no difference in buying a, Marvel comics are now licensing for the movies, basically.
Yeah.
Like that's where the creative energy is now on the film side.
But it's also interesting that all the most of the stories that they're drawing from are from the last 20 years. Like it's like, Marvel's been around for 70 years ish, but like almost every storyline they're adapting into the comics they're doing are like from the last 10 to 20 years. Like pardon?
You mean the movies themselves?
Yeah, like it seems like because like all these creators that are, that's why you can kind of get these stories or how they're being treated by them is because like almost everything they're doing seems to be. I mean, obviously there's core parts of the characters, but like Extremists or the Winter Soldier or the things that they choose to really focus on a lot of the movies seem to be more recent storylines. I guess maybe because they're easier to fit in with modern sensibilities. But
I mean, it depends. I think it depends on what like the She-Hulk stuff very much was about the Byrne run, which was like late 80s, and
yeah, which was great.
A lot of WandaVision was from the 80s Vision Scarlet Witch series, the living in groups and stuff. So it's kind of the most iconic aspects. But these days they just kind of grab random names and like the the Trenchcoat Mafia in Hawkeye was officially known as the Trenchcoat Mafia, and I was like, I thought the Trenchcoat Mafia was something Hawkeye made up in the comics to make fun of them. They weren't like official name was not the Trenchcoat Mafia.
That sort of retconning is always interesting. Cool. So now that what came next, I guess, after you finished up with Marvel? Was there any kind of a falling out there? Or is it just greener pastures over there?
No, my exclusive contract was up. A bunch of stuff got canceled, and the market had a downturn, and I think they just, I didn't have anyone to, once I stopped popping out golden eggs like the Machine Man, Marvel Zombies, like at a certain point, there's only so many miracles you can work. And if they don't give you, Fantastic Four or some regular book, your value is done. And I've done an indie comic called The Comic Book History of Comics that dealt with some of the unsavory aspects of Marvel's, like the Kirby heirs were suing Marvel at the point by that point that comic came out. And so I got threatening phone calls from Marvel's bureaucracy telling me to cut it out because they were like, well, you're a Marvel exclusive creator, so they're going to think your comics are going to be an official stance by the company. I'm like, that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard. So they threatened me to stop work, that they cut my contract if I didn't stop doing nonfiction comics.
Well, it's amazing how important, how like you're freelance when it's convenient, but you're not when it's not. Like it just depends on whatever way they want to. You're exclusive with them, but you're also a contractor. You're not. So
they were just some guy barged into somebody's office and was screaming. And so even when I said, well, and I'm just like, it was a book about the 80s fight with Kirby. The book is out. It's done. I'm not like like you don't seem to have any conception this isn't like an ongoing series where I just slam Marvel every issue. But I knew after that conversation I was toast, and I was. But yet I'm still here talking to you on your podcast. I'm still around, still doing comics.
Yeah. What are you working on nowadays?
So I did a lot for Valiant,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some more Valiant stuff coming out that I'm very excited about, including an Archer and Armstrong series. I'm coming back to Archer Armstrong.
Oh, cool. That's always a property that I always really liked and feel like never really got as much of a due as it should have.
I mean, it's the one thing people keep coming up to me about. I think that's the comic that I've done that I hear the most, like and also Action Philosophers and the nonfiction stuff. I've got I got a lot of stuff coming out in the fall. I have a Mad Cave book.
Oh, cool.
Create your own book that I'm very excited about that I've got to start writing the last issue for today. And I write prose novels now. Never Sleep, my latest book, is behind me there.
Oh yeah,
the Big Fred. And I just turned
by the Nicolas Cage fan fiction. Yeah.
And then I've got a bunch of other fun. I've got a bunch of fun comics things coming out, but
cool. Oh, I'm excited for the Archer and Armstrong. I remember on some podcast I listened to, I think it was like the best movies never made or one of those. There had some writer that was talking about projects he worked on that never got made into film, but one of them was an adaptation of that as a film, I think. Which
yes, it's quite possible. The guy who wrote Shrek. I don't know if that's who you were listening to.
It must have been. I think it made
attached for a long time.
Yeah,
but then he got in trouble because he's an anti-vaxxer and got in trouble.
Did he? Oh man,
I don't know what happened with that. But yeah, poor Valiant had no luck in the movie.
Well, and it's funny because some of their stuff has been around for so long. Like I guess you think about it in the grand scheme of comics, maybe not. But I mean, when did Valiant start? That was the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So it's 30 years now, 30 issues. So like it's significant characters, that have long histories now. But
some video games like the Shadow Man game.
Yeah, well, they tried. I mean, was the Bloodsport movie, right? Or a Bloodspot?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know they were
but that got released in March 2020, and so that was just bad historical luck.
Fair enough, yeah. But I know they tried. Like I think Ninjak was a show for a while, and
they did a web. I never quite understood the point of that, but yeah, they did that for a while. So so I've got a bunch of stuff cooking right now on the stacks. I'm doing the Pathfinder comic for Dynamite. That last issue have just come out, and then I'm doing. I really love doing. We brought the boys at the beginning of the podcast. I love doing Jennifer Blood, which is this sort of female Punisher crime book that Garth Ennis created for Dynamite. So
that's still going. Cool.
Oh yeah. I'm on my third, fourth, depending on you count it, story arc right now. So that's coming out right now. It's called Blood Diary.
Do you have any sort of like when you get a property like that was created by another creator? Is there sort of I guess an unwritten rule as such that you reach out to that person, or is that just something that
I've never
no?
done that.
I was curious about that because there's some properties that it seems like someone's like I talked to this guy, but I talked to and they gave me their blessing, or I talked to Eric Larson a while ago, but like talking to Alan Moore about trying to get like the 1963 characters, and Moore's like, I don't care, do whatever the hell you want, So like, I guess when it's a company hires you, I mean, obviously, as someone who's just trying to make it in the industry, you gotta do as it comes.
Garth lives like 3 miles that way, across the river in Lower Manhattan. So I randomly met him once at a convention at Kansas City, so I don't know him at all. And I think that was a work gun for hire gig anyway. I don't think.
Yeah, probably so.
Anybody owns Jennifer Blood, so it's not like being out of royalties or whatever.
Well, it's similar sensibilities. Like I like that you mentioned earlier on that because I feel like no one's. I mean, I think people have tried. I mean, I guess there are characters that do fit into the overlapping of horror and superheroes, with Marvel Zombies and stuff like that, and aspects of that in the boys. But the idea of like really leaning into that—that's why when you mentioned the idea for Alpha Flight and the government and the weird twisted sort of dark stuff in the behind scenes. I mean, even just like the Wendigo, whose like character comes from cannibalism in the woods, And I always thought it was funny that, like, Wolverine, who's, this tragic character who's had his life ripped away from him and these horrible experiments done on him, was done by, like, the Canadian government. So, like, which is like, I mean, obviously we're not pristine as well. We do lots of shit too. But the idea that
that's why it's so funny that Alpha Flight was created, because Wolverine needed villains from his backstory, and now there's like 700 characters from Wolverine's backstory.
Yeah, well, even like, because
always learning about, and there's like 3 Wolverines now.
Yeah, that's the new thing, is let's make multiple versions of, like, DC's like, let's make 3 Jokers now and try to figure out how that works. Like, just, it seems to be the way. Oh yeah, with Wolverine it was like the time turn. They killed him, but then they bring a old man Logan as the new Wolverine for a while, and it's comics are fun to explain to people that don't read comics, especially.
Greg then doing the Weapon X book for a while, and they're like, we want you to use Laura X-23, and I'm like, okay. It's like girl Wolverine. All right, I don't really understand what this character's deal is. Then they got to the point, like, now it's self-parody, because now there's Honey Badger, which I learned about recently, who's a clone of X-23. I mean, I don't know what the clone of Honey Badger would be called, but
I mean,
get enough Wolverines,
And that's the beauty of this, like the turf wars you described. It's like everyone wants to create the next thing, right? So, like, it's like everything gets thrown at the wall, and anything that, even stuff that doesn't stick just keeps getting thrown. So let's make a character called Honey Badger. That's exciting. That's what the people want.
It's God only knows what'll happen once Disney decides to start rolling out its own X-Men movie franchise.
Yeah. Well, I have another podcast with the gentleman that reached out to you originally, Davin, which we watched that old one from the Fox cartoon from the 90s. And so we've talked at length in episodes about, and right now we're watching the movies they'd done in the past because we ran out of show or waiting for the new one to start. It should be interesting. I mean, it's kind of weird to inject. I guess they're really going hard in this multiverse thing, and maybe that'll probably play into it. But and whatever the Deadpool movie turns out to be. But it's just It's weird because they really have to rectify with, like, a universe that everyone really knows, and that they have, like, it's going to be hard for them to eschew Hugh Jackman and all those other things people liked of it, to start over again and do it their own way and make it unique and different.
I guess they've already rebooted it once. I think First Class is probably the best X-Men movie. So
I just rewatched it for the show, and I don't know, man. I remember thinking the same thing. And after watching it, I was like,
and I should preface this by saying I'm not an X-Men
fan. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I'm maybe not the guy with the pulse.
Well, yeah. Especially with, like, Davin is that kind of guy, like the guy that really knows everything about it. So, like, we often will collide sometimes when talking about it, because, like, he's like, well, Wolverine's not tall enough and this character's not that enough. And I'm like, there are things you have to let go when it comes to adaptations, because you're not going to please.
Wouldn't Wolverine be he's too tall? Wouldn't that be more of the problem?
Oh, sorry. Other way. Yeah. Like the Hugh Jackman was far too tall. Was his problem, and it's like that's kind of an arbitrary reason to just, like, the character.
Sure you're aware of this? He's not Canadian. He's Australian.
Yeah. Well, he has his own. I can't remember who he said he thought would be the best for it, but it was somebody. I was looking up actors that were like 5'7" at that time period, and, like, who would fit into that, and it's like
not a lot. Tom Cruise when you need him.
Yeah. I don't think
Tom Cruise
jumping out of a plane somewhere. Well, thank you so much for being at the show, Fred. This has been a real treat talking to you.
Pleasure. Yeah, let me know when it airs, and I'll promote it and all that good stuff.
Absolutely, I'll drop you a link, and maybe next time you're up in Moncton in New Brunswick, we'll all be able to catch up with you in person.
That'd be awesome. I want to go back to Moncton.
Oh well, I'll pass it on to Nick if I'm talking to him.
Pass that news along.
All right.
That word along.
Will do. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Bye. There it is, my chat with Fred Van Lente. Great conversation, very cool guy, and a lot of interesting stories, and free and candid with information about working for Marvel's, like the turf wars, as he mentioned, which is kind of refreshing to hear because not everyone's so open about that, especially when they're still working there. So, I mean, I don't want to crap on Marvel. Like, I love what they do. But, you know, like any business that works with our artists and art types, it's not easy to reconcile art and business. That's one of the biggest things between those two industries, especially when they overlap, where the difficulty starts. And that's it right there. So, yeah, Fred was very open about that. And I was very appreciative of him, you know, talking about those aspects of it, because it's all part of it. It's all part of the soup, man. The big soup. Big soup we call the comic industry. Yeah, so things are going well on my end, as always, and I hope so with you. Be sure to tune in a couple weeks. Oh, no, that's the old format. Look, see how the brain works? And when you get older, it gets like a sieve. And it's easy to follow. You get these things in your head, and with old formats, when they change, and this has been changed for quite a while now, sometimes it bleeds through. It does, and it's not always the easiest thing to try to, reconcile. It just slips out sometimes. So, but our next interview is with Diedrich O. Smith, who is another person that's been involved with the comic industry for quite a while and put some good stuff as well. So I hope you can tune into that episode. I'm sure you're not going to let me down. You're not gonna leave me hanging. You're gonna tune in. You're gonna subscribe. You're gonna tell your friends about it. You're gonna send me some comments if you dig the show. You're gonna send me some complaints if you don't. I'll answer everything. You know, I'm not afraid of a little criticism. But and you're gonna share it with all the friends and family and the family. You're gonna sit around the dinner table and say, "Hey, have you guys heard about this thing called podcasting? Let me tell you about a special one." If you do that, I hope you record it. I'd love to hear it. But make sure to tune in next week when I talk to Diedrich O. Smith. In the meantime, stay safe, have fun, read comics, and stay frosty. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.